The documents are spread across my attorney's desk in a clean row, each page marked with a small pink tab. Outside her window, the marsh grasses along the Beaufort waterfront sway in a slow, salt-heavy wind. I have looked at that view my entire life. My husband looked at it his whole life, and his father before him, and his father before that. My phone vibrates against my knee. I look down, my son's name lit across the screen. The 31st call since Tuesday. I press the red button and place the phone face down on my lap. My attorney watches me do it without comment. She is 60 herself, or close to it, and she has spent 3 decades watching families come apart over things they could never quite name, while the documents on her desk told the real story. The pen feels thinner than it should in my hand. It is just a ballpoint, the kind you find in a cup near any reception desk, given away free at bank lobbies. But what I am about to do with it has been pressing on my chest since before dawn. Since the moment 3 weeks ago when I walked out of a banquet hall in Colombia, with my card still sealed in my purse and the fixed smile on my face beginning to ache from holding. "Are you ready?" my attorney asks. I look at the window one more time. The marsh, the water, the live oaks along the bank with their Spanish moss lifting in the breeze like something that belongs to another century entirely. "Let's finish it," I say. 3 weeks before the attorney's office, I drove 3 hours from Beaufort to Colombia to attend a party I had not been invited to plan. My grandson was graduating from his MBA program. My son had organized a celebration dinner at a private event space downtown and texted me the details on a Tuesday evening. The address, the start time, smart casual for dress code. I read those 2 words 4 times. I settled on a blue linen dress I had bought the previous Easter and pearl earrings that had been my mother's. I drove up the morning of and checked into a hotel near the venue so I could rest before the dinner. I did not want to arrive tired. I did not want to arrive as anything other than myself. The venue was the kind of place that costs more per hour than most people earn in a day. Exposed brick walls, Edison bulbs strung in long loops overhead, a bar with a chalkboard cocktail menu written in careful handwriting. My daughter-in-law's friends were already inside when I arrived. Clustered them the bar, with their wine, their laughter easy and practiced, the kind that belongs to people who have known each other a long time and never have to work at it. My grandson found me right away. He always finds me right away. He is 18 and already taller than his father, and he called me Grandma and squeezed both my hands and asked if I'd had trouble finding parking, which made me laugh, which was exactly what he intended. He has always been the kind of person who pays attention to the right things. My son was on the other side of the room, deep in conversation with a man I did not recognize. When he spotted me across the space, he raised one hand in acknowledgement. The way you wave to a neighbor you are glad to see, but not glad enough to walk toward. My daughter-in-law appeared at my elbow with a polished smile and pointed me toward a table near the side wall, close to the kitchen pass-through where servers came and went with heavy trays. "A good table for Watting," she said. "You won't miss a thing from here." I sat and watched. The meal was served in courses. My son gave a toast in the center of the room, standing with his glass raised, his voice warm and practiced. He thanked his wife. He thanked the venue coordinator by name. He thanked his son's professors and academic advisor. He went on for close to 5 minutes. He did not mention me. I cut a piece of salmon on my plate and told myself it was an oversight. He was nervous. He was focused on his son. This was not about me. It was never about me. It was his son's celebration, and I was a guest like any other guest, and I did not need to be mentioned to know my own worth. But then my grandson leaned across the table during dessert, low enough that the people beside me couldn't hear. He said, "I put a photograph of you and Grandpa in my speech, Grandma. I wanted you to know that." He paused, then added, "Dad told me not to mention the inn. He said it made us seem small. But I mentioned it anyway." I set my fork down very carefully. After dinner, during the mingling, I found my son near the bar. I touched his elbow and said I hadn't had a real moment with him all evening. He turned toward me with an expression I had seen before. Polite, slightly compressed. The face of someone who has already decided the conversation is going to take longer than they want it to. "Mom," he said, "you didn't have to make such a long drive for this." I drove 3 hours to celebrate my grandson. "Right, of course." He nodded as if I had said something slightly beside the point. "You look tired. You should probably head back to the hotel and rest. You've got a long drive home tomorrow." I looked at my son for a moment. The line of his jaw, the way he held his glass with his wrist slightly turned, the same way his father used to hold a glass. A small inherited gesture that has always made me love him in spite of everything. I had raised this person. I had sat up through his fevers and his night terrors, and the call from his first real job, when he said he thought he'd made a terrible mistake. I had driven 9 hours round trip for that, just to sit at his kitchen table until he felt steady again. I did not drive 9 hours for the inn. I drove because he was my son, and he needed his mother, and that had always been enough reason. I said good night to my grandson, who walked me to the door and held me for a long moment and said, "Thank you for coming, Grandma. It means everything. Really, it does." I drove back to the hotel and sat on the edge of the bed in my blue linen dress for a long time before I could make myself move to hang it up. The call came the next morning before I had finished my first cup of coffee. My son's voice was quick and bright, running on the kind of energy that means he has already made a decision and is looking for confirmation, not a conversation. He asked how I slept. I said fine. He said he had been meaning to talk to me about something and thought this was a good moment. I set down my cup. He told me about a development company. They had been acquiring coastal properties throughout the Lowcountry, building resort communities, private membership retreats, high-end short-term rental clusters. The market, he said, was extraordinary right now. Generational wealth extraordinary. He was speaking to them on my behalf, he said, as a courtesy, because he didn't want me to miss an opportunity I might not know existed. Our inn sat on nearly 2 acres of waterfront land in Beaufort. My husband's grandfather had built the original structure in 1948, a low clapboard building with wide plank floors and a wraparound porch that faced the marsh. We had added to it over the years, restored what could be restored, updated the bathrooms without touching the bones of the place. We hosted weddings and anniversaries and weekend guests who came back year after year because the breakfast was good and the marsh was beautiful, and nobody ever rushed them out. The inn had been in my husband's family for 78 years. It had been mine to tend for 4 years, since the morning I sat beside his hospital bed and watched him leave it. The developer, my son said, had already made a preliminary assessment. He had told them the property was worth serious consideration. He had told them he would confirm a walk-through by Friday. I said, "Remy, that inn is not for sale." The silence that followed had texture in it. something careful and compressed. He said I had been running the place alone for 4 years. He said it was too much for one person. He said I didn't have to work anymore, that I could be comfortable for the rest of my life, that he had found a beautiful retirement community 20 minutes from his house in Colombia, with a pool and organized activities and people my own age. People my own age, I said. Mom, that inn is where your father and I built our life, I said. It is where we brought you home from the hospital. It is not a real estate asset. There was a shift in his voice then. Something lower and more deliberate moved into it. The developer would like to schedule a walkthrough. Before the end of the month, he said. I hung up. The calls came every day after that. My son in the mornings, patient at first, then clipped, then something that sat between urgency and threat without ever quite becoming either one. A number I didn't recognize called 3 times and left no voicemails. Then one afternoon, a man knocked on the front door of the inn with a clipboard and said he was conducting a property assessment on behalf of a development group and that the owner had given authorization for access. I told him I was the owner and I had given no such authorization, and he needed to leave my property immediately. He apologized and left. But he had already been measuring the length of the dock. That evening, I called my son and asked him directly whether he had sent someone onto my land without my permission. He said he may have given them my address for a preliminary visual from the road. He said it wasn't a significant thing. He said I was being reactive. That night, I could not sleep. I sat in the old chair on the porch, my husband's chair, and looked at the water. The marsh was dark and still. The stars over the river were very clear. In 40 years of living on that property, I had never once sat on that porch and felt anything other than settled. That night, something sat with me that I could not name yet. Something that pressed against the inside of my ribs and would not ease. The next morning, I went to find the deed. My husband had organized all our important papers in a fireproof box in the office closet. I knew every document in that box. I went through it methodically, looking for the reassurance of the deed itself. The simple weight of the paper that said this was ours. The deed was there, but folded behind it, tucked inside the same envelope, was a document I had not put there and had never seen. It was dated 8 months earlier. A durable power of attorney, my name at the top, granting my son full authority over my real property, my financial accounts, and all decisions related to the business operation of the inn. It had been signed. The signature on the line looked like mine. The notary seal was from an office I did not recognize in a city where I had never been. I had not signed that document, not one word of it. My hands were very steady as I carried it to the kitchen table. I sat down with it under the light from the window and looked at it for a long time, the way you look at something that changes the shape of everything behind it. Then I picked up the phone and called my attorney. She met with me that same afternoon. I laid the document on her desk. She read it twice without speaking, once quickly and once with the deliberation of someone checking every clause against something in her memory. Then she set it down and folded her hands on top of it. She said the notary seal was from a county 3 hours away, and she wanted a handwriting analyst to examine the signature before we moved to anything else. I already know it isn't mine, I said. I know, she said, but we need it documented correctly. She asked me what I wanted, not just about the document, about all of it, about what came next. I want the property protected, I said, not complicated, permanent. She nodded and pulled a legal pad toward her. She explained the structure of a limited liability company held within an irrevocable management trust, with a trustee board that I would appoint, subject to conditions that made any transfer of the property impossible without unanimous trustee consent. No power of attorney, real or fabricated, would override it. No heir could contest it after the fact. The inn would exist in that structure in perpetuity, or until the trust conditions were voluntarily dissolved by the full board, which meant it would exist that way as long as I intended it to. Irrevocable, she said. You understand what that means. Once this is filed, you cannot undo it either. I thought about my husband the last night he could speak clearly. He had held my hand and said, "Don't let anyone take what we built." He wasn't speaking only about the property. But he was speaking about the property. I said, "File it." It took 11 days. I signed the final documents on a Thursday morning, the marsh visible through my attorney's window, the grasses moving in a slow, tide-driven sway that I have been watching my whole life and have never stopped finding calming. My phone buzzed 4 times while I sat across from her desk. All 4 were my son. I did not answer any of them. When the last page was done and the documents were stacked and sealed, my attorney told me the filing would be confirmed within 24 hours. Then she looked at me carefully and said there was one more thing to consider. "He doesn't know yet," she said. "You'll need to decide how and when." I picked up my phone and dialed. My son answered before the second ring, his voice high and tightly wound. "Mom, finally. I've been trying to reach you for days. We need to resolve this. The developer is out of patience. They need confirmation this week, and I already told them." "Remy," I said, "stop talking." He stopped. "I need you to listen to me. Are you listening?" "Yes," he said. His voice had gone flat and careful. "The inn is no longer mine to sell." A silence. "What?" "I placed it in an irrevocable trust this morning," I said. "The property belongs to the trust. No developer can access it. No power of attorney, signed or otherwise, gives anyone authority over it. It is protected, permanently." The silence that followed had a weight to it I had not heard from him before. Something cracked open in it. Then his voice came back wrong, fractured and rising. "You don't understand what you've done. They had financing. They had a timeline. I told them this was already settled. I told them you had agreed." "I never agreed," I said. "You were going to. Eventually, you would have understood what you were giving up. You never understand the full picture, Mom. You never—" "I know about the document in the fireproof box," I said. Quiet. "The one with my signature on it," I said. "The one I didn't sign." I heard his breath catch once, quickly, then stop. "That's not something we need to get into," he said. His voice had gone completely flat. "I think it is exactly what we need to get into," I said. I ended the call. I sat for a moment in the quiet of my attorney's office, in the light from the window, with the marsh outside. Then I stood, thanked her, and walked out into the salt air. 2 days later, my daughter-in-law called. She was crying before she finished saying my name. Not polished, not controlled. The kind of crying that has been building quietly behind something for a long time and finally forces it open. She had found messages on her husband's phone. A thread with the developer's representative, going back nearly a year. She had not been looking for anything. She had picked up his phone to silence an alarm, and the screen had been unlocked. In the messages, my son described me as resistant, difficult, not fully aware of what she was sitting on. He told the developer the paperwork was being handled. He said the old woman will come around once she sees there are no other options. He said he expected to have the deed transferred before spring. She had not known about the document. She had known there was a deal in the works. She had known it involved the inn, and she had believed I had agreed because he told her I had agreed. She said that more than once, quietly, "The way you say something you need to hear yourself say out loud in order to believe the shape of it." I believe her. She asked me if I was all right. I said I was. She asked if she could bring the grandchildren sometime, just her and the children. She said my grandson missed the porch. She said the younger one asked about the osprey. I said yes. 6 months have passed since I sat in that attorney's office and signed the documents and felt the pen move across the page with a steadiness that surprised me, as if my hand had already decided, long before my mind caught up. Spring came back to Beaufort the way it always does. Suddenly and fully, the azaleas along the front walk, going up in a color almost too bright to look at. I planted new herbs in the kitchen garden, had 3 dock boards replaced where the wood had begun to soften near the posts. A pair of osprey built their nest in the pine at the edge of the property and stayed. Every morning at breakfast, I point them out to the guests, and we watch them together, the parents coming and going over the marsh with fish silver in their talons, moving with the focused efficiency of creatures who have always known exactly what they were made for. My daughter-in-law came in April with the grandchildren for 4 nights. We did not spend much time talking about her husband. We talked about the children's school and the kitchen garden and a book she was reading, and what I remembered about the inn when I was young and still surprised by the way the light behaved in the mornings. She helped me deadhead the roses along the back fence on the 3rd afternoon. We worked quietly side by side in the shade, and she handed me the clippers when I asked for them, and that was enough. My grandson called last month on his own, just to talk. He said he was proud of me. I don't know exactly what he knows or how much he has pieced together, but he said it plainly, with no performance around it, the way he says the things that matter to him, and I have held on to it every day since. My son has not called since the conversation in my attorney's office. I do not know yet whether that silence is grief or calculation, or the first slow movement toward something that will eventually find words. I keep room for the possibility that it will change. I keep room for the possibility that it will not. Both of those futures are ones I can live inside. What I could not have lived inside was the other one. The one where I let the inn go because someone I loved had decided I was too old, or too tired, or too unaware to protect what I had spent my life tending. There is a rocking chair on the front porch that nobody owns and everybody uses. Guests find it on the way out with their coffee in the early morning, and they sit in it and look at the marsh, and nobody feels obligated to say anything. That is what decades of caring for a place produces. A kind of stillness you cannot manufacture. My husband knew that. He built toward it. I spent a long time believing that love required a certain kind of endless softening, bending to whatever came, absorbing whatever was asked, staying patient past the point where patience was doing anyone any good. I gave that way of loving a great deal of credit. I thought it was the strongest form it came in. What I understand now is that love also shows up as the thing that holds its ground. Not from hardness, not from the part of you that is angry, though that part has a right to exist, but from the same deep and stubborn care that built the thing worth protecting in the first place. The part that says, not this, not this one. The osprey are on the nest this morning. I can see them from the kitchen window while the biscuit dough comes together under my hands. Outside, the marsh is moving from silver to pale green as the sun comes up over the tree line, the way it has come up every morning of my life. Here, the way it will come up long after I am gone. Some mornings, that knowledge is the most comforting thing I know how to hold on to. That the land stays, that what you protect with enough intention and enough love becomes something no single person can dismantle. That legacy is not what you hand over when someone asks for it. It is what you refuse to let be taken.